Hello, hello, and hi, and welcome to another edition of Things We Said Today. This is a Beatles talk show podcast that we do every couple of weeks, and we talk about anything and everything Beatles here, the past, the present, what's going on in the news, their music, their history, anything that comes to mind. And on today's show, we have a very special guest that we've never had here before. And he has to do with the history of one of the bands that ended up on Apple Records. And we're going to talk to him shortly after we get to our newscast. But before we do that, let me welcome my other two co-hosts of the show. First of all, you know him for his 40 plus years on New York radio on WFUV, where he's been playing all the rock and roll that you need to hear.
Everything that's ever been recorded.
That's right. And you get to hear it all in 1 hour on his show. He condenses it. But anyway, aside from that, he also does some Beatles specials occasionally, does great interviews for the station, and that's, of course, our very own Darren DeVivo. Hello, Darren.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Ken. Hello, Alan.
Darren. And of course, we have Allan Kozinn, who is one of the co-authors of the McCartney Legacy series, volumes 1 and 2 so far, along with Adrian Sinclair. He's also the author of Got That Something, How the Beatles I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything, and the Beatles from the Cavern to the Roof. Or is it rooftop?
Oh.
Rooftop. Okay. Hi, Alan.
Hey Ken, hey Darren, and hello everyone out
Oh.
there.
Okay. I think I have the Supremes on my mind, up the ladder to the roof. That's why it's interfering with the title there. Anyway, so like I said, we'll welcome a very special guest to bring on in just a few minutes, but we do have quite a bit of news to get to here. And as I'm sure you know, uh, the big surprise, well, it's not a surprise to you now, but Paul McCartney gave a surprise concert last night on February 11th at the Bowery Ballroom in New York City. This was to a crowd of 600 people. It was announced early that day. I believe it was 12 noon. You had to show up in person and buy a physical ticket, only one per person. The show sold out in 30 minutes. Tickets were $50. The set list was really nothing new that he hasn't done before. Most of the songs are for his current Got Back tour, although he did bring back From Me to You into the set list and Mrs. Vanderbilt for the show. And Paul was accompanied by his touring band and a three-piece horn section, the same horn section that he's had for the Got Back tour. And just this morning we heard he's adding another show tonight, and we're doing this on the 12th. We don't know if there'll be a third show, but we do know that Paul is going to be one of the guests on the 50th anniversary show for Saturday Night Live, airing this Sunday. You guys want to say anything about this surprise concert from last night? Whatever you've heard?
I don't know, Alan. I mean, I pretty much, as of the three of us, live the closest to New York City. Um, I was, completely, as everyone was, caught off guard by the initial announcement yesterday and knew that the situation was going to be very hard to get tickets, especially when there's only one way to get them. You got to get them in person. And I was not really at liberties to pretty much drop what I was doing and still have a shot to get to Bowery Ballroom, which is down in Lower Manhattan on Delancey Street. Um, so it sort of became a little bit of an obsession as the day went along yesterday about what was going on. Why was he doing this show? Is this tied into Saturday Night Live rehearsals, perhaps, for his performance on the music special, which is, or really, I don't know if it's just a music special, if it's a complete celebration of Saturday Night Live, which is airing Sunday night, if I'm not mistaken. It's supposed to be like 3 hours long,
Right.
whatever. I remember we were also toying with, before we, did anything here amongst ourselves via text. Could he be launching a new album? Is this a way to play some new songs, debut them? Um, Turned out it was Paul, doing a kind of a condensed version of his arena shows and
Hmm.
his stadium shows that he's been doing recently. But then the debate, the Bowery Ballroom had cleared out their schedule for last night, which was Tuesday. Tonight we're recording this on Wednesday and Thursday. Those shows on those 3 nights were moved to other venues. Friday was open at Bowery Ballroom. Then they have someone booked to play Saturday. While it's exciting that Paul's doing all of this, at the same time, uh, as a fan, it's frustrating because I want to be, but the amount of work for just that sliver of hope that would become a ticket, so this is what's going on in my head right now
Right.
about my possibilities if there's a third show, which it's starting now to look like every indication is there will be one. I mean, it's exciting that Paul does these things. He's not unique. Many acts will play these unique shows to make announcements or for press purposes or whatnot. And I guess it's cool it's been opened to the general public. Bowery Ballroom is small. I honestly can't remember if I've been there. I probably have. But I think like you said, did you say, Ken? You said 600 people, I think was
That's
the capacity, and I'm hearing things like a small amount of admissions tickets for of that 600 were what was sold, and that's played into why the tickets were gone so quickly last night and for night two tonight. So it's fun. Curious to see why he's doing it. Curious about the amount of work that he's putting his voice through
Hmm.
in advance of a television appearance. So, I read a formal review from someone. I don't know if you saw the Variety magazine review of last night's show. But it was a pretty thorough, very straightforward review of what happened, and said he was in strong voice, but singing in a measured way.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. It's fun. It's exciting. It's frustrating. It's you know, it's everything rolled into one. But again, when all is said and done, I say to myself, thank God at his age, he's still doing stuff like this. Because between the Super Bowl and now these shows and this weekend, Saturday Night Live, he's done more in a week than I've done in 6 months.
And from what I understand, I don't know if it was the the article in Variety, but he was being very playful with the audience and ad-libbing things. And there was one fan in the audience that was yelling out, "Fly into my home!" He was-
Oh, really?
yeah.
Another
Another.
article said that, Bill King in a report in Beatle fan said someone called out temporary secretary, and he turned
Right.
to the band and said, we should work on that.
Hmm.
So maybe that will turn up on another set list.
Well, that's the thing. I'm curious to see if tonight's show and if there is a third show, if the set list will vary at all.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Paul has said words to the effect that we know something like 90 songs that we could do. So it probably won't vary from anything in there, I guess, songs that they've already done. But we'll have to wait and see. Um, yeah, but I'm just this is not nothing new for Paul anyway. Um, the up close specials at the Ed Sullivan Theater to promote Off the Ground. Um, I was very lucky to go to both of them, kind of by accident, and Allan was at one of those. And I was also at the Mean Fiddler show in London in right before Unplugged. Those are in preparation for Unplugged. That was a very small club. He's done this before, so it's not something new, but it's a cool idea to do it. But by the time I had found out about this, the tickets were already sold out for
Did
yesterday's
the
show.
High Line in 2007 to promote Memory Almost Full, which
Right.
Darren and I both went to.
Yeah.
The thing is, at this time, he doesn't have anything to promote. All of those other, small venue shows, he had something new coming out, and now he's promised a new album for this year, but we don't know anything about it yet. And he didn't play anything from it. So I don't know. The only thing I have to say really is that having seen him in both the usual places like, Yankee Stadium and Madison Square Garden, and having seen him also at like the Highline Ballroom and the Up Close special and the Cavern, and yeah, Lone Star Roadhouse, singing a few songs at a Buddy Holly Week thing. Um, those small shows, those for me are the most memorable, because you're closer. He does have interaction with the audience because he can hear what people say because there was only a few hundred people in the audience. And it's looser, he's not concerned about, the timing of what he says between songs because the pictures are changing on the jumbotron or whatever. It's a loose show, like a rock and roll band playing a show, and I've really enjoyed the small things like that much more than the big shows. Well, I enjoyed those too, but still, there's something special about these small shows that he does. And if you, for people who've already read through Volume 2 of the McCartney Legacy, you may remember that there was a period after Wings Over America where, in interviews, quite a lot, he was saying, "You know what? I'd really like to do something like maybe a little residence someplace, like have a small venue where we can turn up and play for a week, or that kind of thing." So it's something that's always been on his mind. I mean, the university tours, just turning up and playing, uh, that that sort of seems to be a part of what he wants to do periodically, and he can, so yeah, I think for everybody who got into it, I mean, I'm sure this will be a pretty special memory.
Yeah. And as much as I complain about the set list and that he doesn't really vary too much or find new material to put in, if you're in an environment like this, really up close, you may not care as much about the set list because you
Yeah.
you push that out of your mind. I mean, if you can see the man's face and his body and the whole band there that close, instead of looking up on a screen in a stadium, it makes it even the more special and more memorable. So
You guys are putting a lot of pressure on me on attempting to get to whatever next show is. If I have to stand in the rain at 4 o'clock in the morning because of
Mhm.
well, good luck to those of you who are trying to get in, and hopefully there'll be a third show. We'll find out. By the time this show gets posted, there'll be more news that we
yeah.
haven't got to yet. Anyway, since you alluded to this, Darren, Paul was also spotted with his wife Nancy, and I heard with Adam Sandler at the Super Bowl. Don't know which team Paul was rooting for, but he was there. You see Paul turn up at a lot of these sporting events. And we have to talk about the Grammy Awards. It was a big night at the Grammy Awards for the Beatles, although you'd never know it if you watched the broadcast, which really veered away from rock performances and awards. And while the Beatles lost out on Record of the Year for the song Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, the Beatles won the award for Best Rock Performance for Now and Then. And Sean Lennon and Simon Hilton won the award for Best Boxed or Special Limited Edition Package for the archival box set for Mind Games. And actually, I kind of found it a little bit odd that Paul or Ringo weren't there at all. Giles Martin showed up, but Sean Lennon actually gave a little speech for the Beatles because Giles wasn't there. Giles was late, I think, to the event. But you saw him in the audience if you watched the TV broadcast. But Sean spoke for the Beatles for their award. And a few other albums had involvement from Paul McCartney. Beyonce's album Cowboy Carter won the award for Album of the Year and Country Album of the Year. And Beyonce's album includes a cover of Blackbird. And Paul gave Beyonce permission to use his acoustic guitar playing from the Beatles' White Album. And the Rolling Stones won the award for Best Rock Album of the Year for Hackney Diamonds, which had Paul help out, playing bass on the song Bite My Head Off. Still, a good night for the Beatles, right there. Now, some news that I'll bet many of you have not heard before until now. The news about Paul and Babs. Babs meaning Barbra Streisand, who is planning another album of duets to be released, and Paul McCartney is among those who are said to be featured on her upcoming album. While this is not confirmed, I mean, he's going to be on it, he might be doing, I'm hearing, My Valentine with Barbra Streisand. And that album should be coming out, I believe, in it's March or April. Barbra Streisand's album of duets. Okay. Some updated news on One to One, the documentary. We reported, of course, this is John's only full-length concert in his solo career. The One to One concert at New York's Madison Square Garden will premiere in IMAX theaters on the date of April 11th and will be shown on HBO late in the year. And to celebrate Record Store Day, the following day, April 12th, they will issue a limited edition 12-inch EP called Power to the People, live at the One to One concert in New York City, with 4 songs on 180-gram yellow vinyl from both the afternoon and evening concerts, 3 of which have never been released before. The 3 unreleased recordings are Well, Well, Well from the evening show, and Cold Turkey and Don't Worry Kyoko from the afternoon show. The 4th song, already released, is Instant Karma from the afternoon show. The Record Store Day release is limited to 3,000 copies in the US and 5,500 worldwide. Okay, so we're getting some definite word here about the One to One concert, the documentary. I can't wait to see it in IMAX. April
Hmm.
11th date for that, and then Record Store Day the next day for that EP with 4 songs from the One to One shows. Also on Record Store Day, there'll be a 12-inch release of the new 2024 remix of George Harrison's Be Here Now, backed by the song being covered by Beck. Interesting. The Beck version is the first time it's been released, and it's considered an Apple Music exclusive. And George Harrison's monumental album, All Things Must Pass, the 2014 remastered version. There'll be a Zoetrope, is that how you pronounce it?
I think it's Zoetrope.
Zoetrope 3 LP picture disc on Dark Horse Records. Okay. We have to mention the death of British singer and actress Marianne Faithfull. She's
Hmm.
best known for her recording of the Rolling Stones song As Tears Go By, which made the top 10 in the US on the Billboard charts, peaking at number 6 and number 9 on the UK charts. She's also known for having a long romantic relationship with Mick Jagger, and she was among the background singers for the Beatles' recording of Yellow Submarine. The Stones song Sister Morphine was written by Marianne with Mick and Keith, and Paul McCartney issued a statement online. He said, "What sad news that Marianne Faithfull has passed away. She came into my life in the 60s and was a beautiful, sweet 17-year-old who radiated innocent joy. Then through the years, I was lucky enough to run into her and to become a lifelong friend. It's very sad to think that I won't be meeting her again, but my memories of our encounters over the years will always bring me joy. May God bless you, Marianne, and guide you in the next steps of your journey, Paul." And Julian Lennon posted on Facebook. So very sad to hear of Marianne Faithfull's passing, a uniquely special soul. She was one of a kind, someone who truly did stand out among her contemporaries. Deepest condolences to her family and friends. Among the songs covered by Marianne, no surprise, she covered Yesterday, along with so many other people. She also covered I'm a Loser and Working Class Hero, which was on her album Broken English, 1979. She covered Isolation and Beware of Darkness. Marianne died on January 30th at the age of 78. Okay, just learned of the passing of John Kurlander, one of the engineers at Abbey Road Studios. The one thing that sticks in my mind about John was that he was the guy that took out Her Majesty out of the Abbey Road medley and stuck it at the end of the reel, which is why there's that very long pause in between the end and Her Majesty, because there was leader tape in between. When they decided to remove it out of the medley, um, they just put it at the end of the reel because they were told not to waste anything. And when the Beatles played it back and they heard Her Majesty at the very end after that long pause, they thought it sounded great there at the end, so they kept it in. And Alan, you were just telling me today that you had interviewed John.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I, I first met him in maybe 1987 or 86. He was in Philadelphia. I was covering a recording session with the Philadelphia Orchestra. They were recording the Beethoven symphonies, and by this point, John was a classical producer, and so he was producing that session. And we went and had lunch, and that wasn't a formal interview, but we were talking about, for instance, the CDs. And it's kind of funny. I don't know if you remember in those days, uh, everybody was sort of worried that when the CDs came out, what would happen would be all the mono mixes would be lost because only the stereo mixes would be put on CD. It never would have occurred to us that the first four would have come out originally only in mono. I mean, that was a shock. It was sort of the opposite shock of what we were expecting. Um, and, we talked a bit about that and what they were going to do, and he didn't really, know exactly what they were going to do. But he talked about working with the Beatles. And one of the things he told me that was really, well, a few things he told me were really interesting. One was that about Everest, that Abbey Road was supposed to be called Everest and that they had agreed originally to all be flown to Mount Everest to shoot the cover picture. And he said, there wasn't any disagreement about it. It's just that when it got down to it, nobody really could be bothered. And so they said, let's just go out in the street and take a photo. And it became Abbey Road. Um, and I think maybe that sort of simplifies a little bit what happens. I mean, it leaves out the part about Paul doing the drawings and, all that stuff. But he also said, and other people have contested this, that, they knew that it was going to be their last album and that's why they were calling it Everest because it was a way of saying they're going out on top. Everest was at that point the highest mountain in the world. Now it may be K2. I'm not sure whether they keep going back and forth. But and the other thing he told me that was interesting was he said, the thing about the Beatles is that like each one of them individually was just great to be with. They were funny, they were friendly. It was just you just had a great time with them. And with two of them, it was still really good. With three of them, it got to be a little bit dicey. And if all four of them were in the room together, they were the most horrible people you could imagine, because there was definitely a sense of you are either one of those four or you are outside. And even if you've been friendly with them, individually or in small groups, you were an outsider if all four of them were in the room. And that was sort of interesting. I mean, that George Martin probably didn't have that perception, but John Kurlander did. Um, and then, we interviewed him again for McCartney Legacy Volume 1, because he did some work with Paul early on. And he was a good guy. I really liked him. I was sad to hear that he died.
Yeah, that's interesting about, and you brought this up before about what he said about seeing the Beatles, whether it's one or four of them. Makes you wonder if they were very careful about how they looked to people if all four of them were together. They were more cautious about maybe their appearance or how they come over to people that way.
I
And they were
think,
just looser when with less people.
I say the way I've always interpreted it is that, because of the sort of very pressurized touring years and Beatlemania fan years, they sort of became a sort of cohesive group of like only the four of us know what this is like, and there's us versus the world, and that even later on, because he was working on, Abbey Road. But even later on, they sort of maintained that sense of them and us. So that's the way I took it, and that maybe, maybe
Very,
not.
very possible. That
Yeah.
makes sense to me anyway. All right, more news here. The April 4th, 2025 issue of Guitar World has George Harrison on the front cover, which reads 40 years worth of his greatest songs, solos, and innovations. It also says there's an interview with Danny Harrison, who discusses George's Living in the Material World album. Many thanks to John Bazzini for that information. For those of you who like to hear Beatle covers, the legendary Tommy James has just released a cover of "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away." Tommy is quoted as saying, "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away is one of my favorite Beatles songs. Their version has a sparse arrangement that was wide open for a different approach. I created a gospel-inspired one since the song always affected me that way." And indeed, it is a much slower version. It's 5 minutes long. And according to its posting on YouTube, Tommy was asked by Sony Music Publishing to pick a song that he'd like to cover for from their Lennon McCartney catalog that they could pitch for use in a film or for TV or for commercials. And this is the one that he chose. It's just a single released digitally from Tommy James. Jeff Lynne's Facebook page announced that the final concert for Jeff's ELO will be at the BST, British Summer Tour Festival. That's in Hyde Park in London on July the 13th. Among the other acts performing that day will be the Doobie Brothers, Steve Winwood, and Danny Harrison. There'll be a full lineup to be announced shortly. Now, Paul Myers has his own podcast called the Record Store Day Podcast. And Paul Myers is a music journalist. He's released a couple of books, and he is the brother of Mike Myers. This particular podcast uh, is inspired by record store experiences.
Hmm.
He wanted to have conversations about people the first time they bought their records, what it was like going to a record store, what their collections are like. So there's a lot of conversations and interviews with artists sharing their experiences like this. And there's a new episode, which is actually a compilation of interviews. It's listed as part one, and it's called The First Record I Ever Bought. And he has many guests on the show, including Ringo Starr and Danny Harrison. And if you like, I have a link for that, which will be in your description box if you want to listen to that show. James McCartney has teamed up with the band The Mosaics for their new song Different People, which you can listen to on YouTube. Thanks to Scott O'Rourke for that. The British band The Kooks have covered Arrow Through Me. It will be on their next album due out May the 9th. Ian Mada gave me that information. See all the contributions our listeners make to this show for the news? That's fantastic. There'll be a 3-day symposium called A Dream You Dream Together, a symposium celebrating Yoko Ono, being held this coming weekend, February 14th to the 16th, at the New York City Armory in their listening room. Our good friend Madeline Beccaro will be doing a reading from her excellent book, In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono, on Friday, this Friday at 6 p.m. And for Saturday and Sunday, the symposium is open from 1 to 7 p.m. Remember, Yoko Ono will be celebrating her 92nd birthday
Mm.
on February 18th. That's next Tuesday. And at this time, I want to thank one of our viewers named Joe D, who watched our last show on YouTube. I had a news report about a documentary on Ringo Starr that was going to come out this year on Netflix, covering his entire career and influence. Joe D questioned that because he couldn't find anything online about it. I know I read an article which must have been taken down, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I checked with Ringo's publicist, and she told me it was total fabrication. So good for spotting that, Joe D. And God, it looked like it was a done thing on Netflix too. Even listed Ringo, Paul being interviewed, Olivia Harrison being interviewed. Yeah, but totally false. Okay. Sorry for those of you if I got your hopes up on that. I
You
want to make
disappointed us, Ken.
Sorry. I can't stop all this inaccurate information coming out. You never know what to believe that's on the internet these days. A couple things I want to make mention of. Our good friend John Bazzini has been a tremendous help to this show for me in the news. I often spot him and Steve Marinucci in the past, especially for all the news that they provide for this show. And John Bazzini has his own blog post. And so much of what you hear in my news here, especially new books that are coming out, are all from him. He finds out all this stuff before anybody else. And he is an incredible collector of all print material and recorded material too. It's not just books, it's magazines, it's articles. He collects music with autographs of the artists, books with autographs of the authors, and he lists so many odd things that you may never have heard about. And if you're a collector, I would strongly advise you to sign up and subscribe for his blog post. We're going to include the link in our description box for this, but I know that some people here might think that my news might be too lengthy, but for those of you who can't get enough news, if you want to hear more, I don't use everything that John gives me. So if you want to know everything else that could possibly be out there in the Beatle universe, especially in new releases, check out John's blog post. And like I said, the link will be there in our description box. We also want to thank a website called FeedSpot, who listed our show as the fourth best Beatles podcast on the internet. And FeedSpot is an interesting source for information because you can look up a particular topic and find out many of the podcasts that exist on that topic with a description for them, who the hosts are, with links if you want to get in contact with them. And we're going to provide for you a link to their page to find out more about them. And we're very honored that they included us in their list of their top 40 Beatles podcasts. And there's just so many out there. So as long as you guys watching this agree that, we're number one, really, you can look at all the other ones that are there on the list. I mean, we'll take number four, but, we know we're number one. Anyway, but if you want to see all the other podcasts that are out there on the internet, then by all means, check out FeedSpot. And again, thanks to the staff there for including us in your list. It's quite an honor.
Thank you.
And that's it for Beatle News this time. And as promised, we have a very special guest on Things We Said today. Those of you who are Badfinger fans are familiar with the name Ron Griffiths. He goes all the way back to the very beginning of the band during the Iveys years and takes you up through the beginning of when the band was dealing with Apple and releasing Come and Get It and Magic Christian music. And we're going to talk about the history of Badfinger and the Iveys here with Ron. But part of the reason why he's here is to let us know about this. This is a CD of demos called How Much Is the Sky from the Iveys. It was recorded from 1967 through 69. It's just been released by Y&T Records. And I think all Badfinger fans are aware of all the releases that Y&T has put out on Badfinger. There are Pete Ham demos, there are Tom Evans demos, there are Iveys live releases. There was a double CD tribute to Pete Ham called Shine On. But we're going to talk about a lot of the music on this CD of demos. But let's welcome Ron Griffiths to Things We Said Today.
Well, hello, gentlemen. Nice to meet you. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
No trouble. It's past my bedtime. No, it's
yes,
not really.
He chose to do this at 11 o'clock at night, his time.
That's fine.
So I'm sure you'll be fine.
Once a night owl, always a night owl.
Mhm.
Let's start by asking this question. The booklet that comes with the CD says that these demos were recorded in a studio from a house that your manager, Bill Collins, rented. Where were these demos kept all these years? Who actually owned them?
Well, at the outset, it would have been Bill Collins, I dare say. He kept them, and thankfully, over the years, I suppose, when Dan Matavina got involved, Dan managed to get hold of them.
Okay. Well, good for Dan. Look, I'm
Yeah,
glad that Bill kept them all these years.
yeah.
Okay. And these recordings were done on a reel-to-reel, and they were two-track recordings. And what do you remember about recording these songs?
Well, the little studio we had, Bill constructed it before we ever arrived in Golders Green, actually, at 7 Park Avenue. He built it because the Mojos used to live there share the house before we moved in. And he built it so Ainsley Dunbar could practice his drumming in there.
Wow.
Huh.
But eventually the Mojos moved out and we took over. And Bill was very, very pro songwriting. He said the only way you're going to make any money in the music business is if you write your own material, which is very, very true. But we were encouraged to write. Pete was the instigator at the outset, and we used to spend hours and hours in that little studio. It was pretty much airtight when you were in there. It was very, very. It was built within a dining room. It was like a square box, and it had padded walls. It was insulated. It was very, very warm in there. We called it the sweat box. But that's where we did all this stuff, and it was on as you said, a little two-track Revox tape machine, and you were able to bounce tracks from one track to the other. But of course, because it was only two-track, the quality gradually eroded, and hence some of these demos that are on that album. Maybe they're not exactly studio quality, but considering what we did them on, they're quite passable.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're pretty good quality.
Yeah, they
There's
were in very good shape.
What's that?
No, I was going to say, no, I just said they were I thought they were in exceptional shape for considering.
Well, I think that's down maybe to Tom and Kevin cleaning them up. Perhaps I mean, I wasn't involved with that. I can only say thanks to those fellas. They've obviously remixed them or cleaned them up.
I'm wondering with today's technology and the kind of software that people can buy these days, where you can isolate tracks, you can really play with the stuff and make it sound even better.
They've done a damn good job anyway.
Oh, definitely. I noticed a little bit of dropout in some of the demos. One of them, there was feedback, but that's fine. I mean, you never had any intention of releasing them.
Well, it adds to the authenticity when you get things like that.
Right. Go back to the beginning of when the band was formed, because it started in 1961. And when did the band start to actually write material? What did they start from the get-go, or was it more the middle of the 60s, or when exactly?
We only ever did one recording session. We used to have a friend named Les Saville who he was a DJ locally. Pete had written a song. What the working title was, I can't truly remember. I think it was "You Know I Like It That Way" was the actual opening line, and that's the first time we ever recorded a Pete song, and that was in a bungalow in a little place in Swansea called Wenaloedd, and Les did the engineering, for want of a better way of putting it, up in his bedroom, and we were in the garage recording this song. I don't know if it exists anywhere, but we thought we were quite proud of it. But it was when we moved up to Golders Green that the actual songwriting and the demo thing started. Prior to that, all we ever did, and even when we were actually recording our own songs, when we did gigs, we were doing covers like most other bands were.
Right.
What kind of material were you playing? What was your repertoire when you were playing covers?
Oh, crikey, now you got me.
I'm just sort of curious what influenced you.
Well, it was R&B. We did Hendrix covers. We did Spencer Davis group covers. We did all sorts of things. Mose Allison covers. it was a pretty broad spectrum.
Interesting.
Pete used to sing Parchment Farm, which is one of Mose Allison's tunes, I think.
Hmm.
You know, and rock and roll, Eddie Cochran, pretty much a broad spectrum on what was in the charts at the time.
Could you see your following build through the years?
I beg pardon?
Could you see your following build through the years?
Following Bill,
Like,
No,
were you building a following during that period before you really started writing songs? But you know, we're a cover band. Were you beginning to attract more and more people?
I can't, I don't know how to answer that. Yeah, you're gonna have to edit this out. I'm a bit flummoxed here.
Okay.
I'm not quite with the question.
No, I'm just asking, in the very beginning, did you notice that your audience grew and you got bigger audiences as the
Well,
years
locally in
went on?
Swansea, yes. To start with, it was pretty mediocre, but as time went on, we got quite a good following locally. Yes, you're right. Um, we played in Swansea generally and district most of the time, but we did have excursions further west where we had to stay out overnight and get a small hotel or a bed and breakfast and stay out. But yes, we did have quite a good following down there, and we were quite, if you like, we weren't the big band locally, but we were one of the more popular ones down there.
Hmm.
Ken,
Okay.
if I could just jump in with a songwriting question. Bill
Right?
Collins encouraged all of you to write. Was that the first time that any of you wrote, or were some of you or all of you already occasionally tinkering with songwriting?
Apart from that initial thing I told you about the Pete's that we recorded in Swansea, that was the first time. Yes.
That was the first.
Yeah.
And did the band begin immediately incorporating original songs that you were writing into your repertoire with the covers, or did that?
Very, very limited. We didn't do very many because the trouble was, when you did gigs, people back then went to a gig to dance and listen to the tunes that were currently in the charts.
Hmm.
They weren't, because if they didn't know it, they weren't interested. That was a sad state of affairs early on, but that's the way it was.
Mhm.
Unless you were actually in the charts and you had a name, if you were if you were a local band, because that's what we were classed as, just a job working band, you had to do covers to please the punters.
Hmm.
Right. Right. Do you remember a song that an original song that you did add, and maybe it tended to be a band favorite that you thought was a good representation of what the group was all about? Can you think of like one or two songs that did stick in your live shows?
The ones that we got a better reaction for, we did a 5 or 6 week stint in Germany, and that, if you like, that got the band really tight when we did that 6 weeks out there. That's the one occasion where we actually did 2 or 3 originals in the set. We did one called "Hold On to What You've Got." I can't remember them all. I mean, I'm knocking on to it now. If I can think of another one, I'll let you know as the interview goes on.
That sounds good. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, I've said this a number of times through the years, but a band like Badfinger, there are certain groups where it's actually quite rare when you'll find a band that has several lead vocalists and several songwriters all in the same group. I mean, there's just a handful, really, of very famous ones. And obviously, you think of the Beatles, but what impresses me the most about Badfinger was the fact that, yes, you had Pete, you had Tommy, you had Mike Gibbons writing songs. The drummer wrote songs in the band, and you wrote songs in the band. And later on, Joey Molland wrote songs in the band. And you all shared on the same albums. And that added so much of a dimension to the group, to me, anyway. But from the get-go, when you were starting to all write, was it in any way a competitive feel with all the members, or were you all very encouraging with each other?
I would say the latter. It was never done as a competition. If Pete did something, you got an enthusiastic response, and Vicky Verky if Tom did. And by the same token, on the limited ones that I did, Pete was very, very encouraging, as was Tom. And Mike, of course, mustn't forget Mike.
Right.
Because Mike's tunes are, if you like, were more off the wall, like mine were.
Actually, one of the last songs on the CD, "Tomorrow Never Comes," which is really a very beautiful song. It's just with an acoustic guitar. That's, very ballady in a way, and is very strong, strong melodically, and that was Mike.
Yeah. The
Was
only thing,
Mike playing the acoustic?
pardon?
Was Mike playing the acoustic, or was it someone else? Does it
That would have
say?
been
I have to look. I don't think.
that would have been Mike.
No.
Okay.
But would have been?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Okay. But
I'm
you
pretty
all
sure.
shine here on this CD. That there's so many songs where you might think, "Oh, wow, great Pete Ham song," and then Tom has a great song. So that's one of the great things about studying Badfinger is that they all made such major contributions as songwriters and great vocally too. You know,
There's
it's
no
easy
doubt
to
in that.
pick out Pete from Tom vocally, and when you all harmonized together, you sounded fantastic.
The three parts, the three-part stuff was very good when we did it, I must say.
Yeah. Was that hard work for the three of you when you worked on that, or
No,
just
not
did it
really.
come naturally?
That came naturally, which is good. There was never a struggle.
Hmm. All right. Well, why don't we have some questions from Alan? I know there's specific songs I want to talk about, but
Okay.
Go
Um,
on, I'll do my best.
um, looking at the material on this disc, I know it covers 67 to 69, and that was sort of a big period of change in music itself. Um, but there are and just listening to the album a few times, it just struck me that there's uh, a lot of different really kinds of music on here. There are some things. You were talking about when we asked what kind of covers you did. You mentioned Mose Allison and R&B and things, and there are some things that seem to show that influence, a sort of bluesy influence, especially guitar solos and things. It has a kind of that British blues sound that was very popular around the more like the 67 end of the spectrum. But your two songs are both sort of in the sort of psychedelic almost vein. Uh, were you influenced by what was going on in that end of the of the style?
It could only have been that. There was no other reason for it. I was probably trying to think outside the box, like some of these psychedelic type bands, I guess. I couldn't put it any other way.
Hmm.
And then, you're saying that the British invasion sound is what you're trying to refer to back in those days. It was referred to as the British invasion, wasn't it?
Yeah, the British invasion, I think we think of as the more sort of, poppy end of the Beatles and early British groups, singles and pop love songs, that kind of thing. And there's some of that in this group too. Um, so there were really three things that stuck me: the blues oriented things, the sort of pop oriented things, and then the almost psychedelic things, and particularly your two. How high, how much is the sky, and what was the other girl with the colorful eyes?
Colorful Eyes.
"Cool Me
Which,
Down" was yours.
hmm?
Yeah,
"Cool
well,
Me Down" was Ron's.
Mhm.
just this. I don't know. I can't really. It's a difficult one to try and put into words. Really, I was I was trying to get away from the norm, if you like. That's about the best way I could put it.
Mhm.
Uh, it didn't come easily to me. I tried to think outside the box to coin a phrase, and it worked for some of them, I think.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it gave the contributions of yours on this album, in any case, a very sort of distinctive sound and approach. Um, Also, the period that you were in the band, in Tom Brennan's notes, he makes an interesting observation that you came up with the name the Iveys, I believe, after a street.
Yeah, that was not long after Mike had joined the band. Actually, we were rehearsing a, a canteen, a railway club canteen, about in the near the city centre. And we were coming back one night. We were all convinced that we needed a name for the band because when Mike joined, we were still living off Black Panthers or whatever it was that Peter called the band initially. And we were driving past Swansea's main railway station, and there's a taxi pulling in at the front of it, and there's the sign out the front says Ivy Place, spelled Ivey.
Mm-hmm.
So I just looked at it. I said, "What about the Iveys, boys?" And they'd seen the sign. Yeah, why not? It's spelled differently. Let's call ourselves the Iveys. That's how it came from
Mm-hmm.
Ivy Place, which is where that blue plaque is outside the station commemorating Pete Ham's songwriting ability. It's
Mm-hmm.
outside the railway station wall. But Ivy Place is the name of where the name came from.
And basically, you left right around the time it was changed to Badfinger.
At that time, yeah.
Yeah, and that was Mal Evans came up with that?
That was I think it was a think tank between the three of them or the four of them. I wasn't around when they actually brought that name out, so I can't answer that one fully. I've read and I've heard that it was Mal Evans' suggestion.
So when you recorded "Come and Get It," you actually recorded it as the Iveys, even though it came out
the
as
name hadn't been changed at that time. No.
Yeah.
The story is, I think that Badfinger Boogie was the working title of
Yeah.
A Little Help from My Friends.
Right.
They were throwing ideas around, and somebody, maybe Mal Evans, Badfinger, and it stuck. Oh, had there been, Ron, any talks about the Iveys needed to be changed, the name, or was that never something that had been discussed while you were still with the group?
Derek Taylor, the Beatles press officer, was concerned about the name because there was a trio in the UK called the Ivy League, and they'd had 2 or 3 top 10 hits. And obviously it was too similar sounding to the Ivy League, so we were encouraged to change the name. Even before I left, we were throwing names into the hat, but we hadn't come up with anything concrete at that time.
Right.
I'm interested in how you got to the attention of the Beatles at Apple. And I mean, I gather that there were like a lot of demos sent over to them until they sort of finally all signed on. But what was that like? Was it when they announced Apple and said, "Send us your stuff," you sent your stuff, and we were just sort of hopeful about hearing something? And what kind of interactions did you have early on?
Well, it wasn't quite like that. We didn't automatically send stuff down there.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was Bill Collins met Mal Evans in the middle of the West End in London on one particular day, and they knew each other from their Liverpool days. And Mal asked Bill, what are you up to now? And he said, "I'm managing this little band back home. As a matter of fact, we're doing a gig tonight in the Marquee Club. Do you want to come and see the boys?" So Mal said, "Yeah, that'll make a nice change." And he came and watched the gig, really enjoyed what we did. During the course of the evening, Bill said, "Actually, the lads have got quite a few songs they've put down on demos. Do you want to come and listen?" So we all went back to 7 Park Avenue, had a drink and socialized for a while. And then he listened to about 5 or 6 of the tunes and he was really impressed. He said, "Do you mind if I take a tape back down with me to Apple?" Which is what he did. I played them to Derek Taylor first, I think, and then I don't know who else listened, but they were very, very impressed. And that's how we managed to get signed to Apple.
Do you remember what songs?
Pardon?
Do you remember what songs they were?
Oh, I can't remember. Honestly, I can't. I really can't, honestly. Sorry to let you down on that one.
Yeah, in the booklet, there's a picture of a tape box that looks like it's a tape that was sent to Apple, but not necessarily the first one, but at least one of the tapes that you sent to Apple. And then they signed you to Apple Records like in July '68, and then to Apple Publishing in October '68. And you mentioned about Bill sort of pushing you to write songs, and there was also some talk of I guess there was a version of "Take Good Care of My Baby," that your one, not the
Yeah.
Bobby V one,
Yeah.
where that was sort of being sent around to other groups to cover it. Did you have much success with Apple Publishing as having other people take up any of your stuff, of the very early stuff?
No, it didn't happen at all.
No. Hmm.
The only one that was ever taken up and done anything with is the one that you all know. Harry Nilsson did it.
Hmm.
No, and there was nobody ever took any advantage of anything that we'd put down as a demo. Not to my knowledge, anyway.
How did you feel in terms of the way Apple handled you as a band? I mean, did you feel like you had their attention? Did you feel ultimately that it was a good thing to be on Apple or a bad thing to be on Apple?
Well, initially we were thrilled to bits because, I think it would have been any band's dream back then to be signed to a company run by the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were thrilled to bits, but as time went on, we got disillusioned because we went on. We put Maybe Tomorrow out as a first single. It was expected to do really well, and as you know, it didn't do particularly well. I think it made the lower reaches of the Billboard Top 100. It did quite well on the European mainland, but it didn't do much anywhere else, and we were disappointed with that. We actually thought, because we were put on the Gene Pitney package tour as well to plug it. It didn't get it didn't get the airplay that it really needed to sell it, and we were disillusioned at that point.
Yeah.
That's when the infamous interview came up. Somebody from Disc and Music Echo, a music magazine over here, came round to our place to do an interview with the band, and I was the only one who was in. And well, would you mind answering a few questions? And I suppose you know all about this. I actually came up with a quip on the lines of, well, we're very, very disillusioned, and we keep submitting songs, but they keep sending them back. The most we've had out of the Beatles is, "Do you want a ciggy?" A cigarette. And Paul McCartney read this article in the magazine, which surprised us, and got in touch with Bill, and he said, "I've got a song I've got for a film I've been asked to do stuff for. I'm too busy at the minute to complete the whole thing. You can have this song if you can come up with two others for the film, which is The Magic Christian."
Mm-hmm.
So he arranged to come round one Sunday morning for us to hear this song we'd never heard before. You can imagine what we were like. We were all in Bill's front room, bedroom office, which overlooked the main street down there, looking like we were like kids at Christmas, But a little yellow minicar pulls up, and out gets Paul McCartney. We'd never met him before. We couldn't believe it, And then he came in with his demo, popped it on Bill's record deck, and the rest is history, as you probably know. He said, "You must play this exactly as you hear it.
Mm-hmm.
This will be the hit, as long as you can come up with two other songs," which is what happened. Rock of All Ages and Carry On Till Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
Of which you're on all three of those songs. We know "Come and Get It," right? And Ron, you're on. They were recorded while you were still with the band, right? "Carry On Till Tomorrow" and "Rock of All Ages."
No, I wasn't on Rock of All Ages because I was ill. I was in bed with chicken pox. They booked the session. I couldn't, they couldn't cancel the session because I was in bed, so they finished that without me. Sadly.
They should have brought like equipment over to the bedroom and had you at least lay down from your bed a backing vocal or something.
Yeah, that would have been good.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Alan.
I've just a couple more. Before we started, you were telling us that you were actually in the Apple building at the time of the rooftop concert, but you were actually down in the Apple studio rehearsing. So that was way before uh, Come and Get It, right? Because that was Come and Get It was like from the summer. So this
Yeah.
would have been January. Um, And the other thing that you mentioned was you showed us your gold record for Come and Get It, which you just recently sort of pursued, right?
Yeah.
Can you have it handy? Hold it up again.
Yes, down here.
So
Yeah.
tell us the story of why it took so long to get that.
Well, I was always intrigued, going back years now, as to how well it had done. One of the last times I ever spoke to Bill Collins, I actually said, "Do you know how many copies of I'll Come and Get It actually how it did sales wise?" And he said it was just short of 900,000. Ron, I said, "Oh blast, we'll never get a gold disc for it now then." And it just went by, left years and years and years. And recently I discovered, I forget how I found out, but that it had sold over 1 million copies. Oh, surely we're entitled to some sort of an award for that. I made various inquiries. I got different recommendations. Try this, try that. Various people said, "Why didn't you try this?" I tried Tony Visconti, and he put me on to his manager, who wanted £350 UK pounds up front just to do it for me. He wasn't interested in the estates and widows. I said, "Well, you can show that where the sun doesn't shine." I said, "I actually want this not just for me, but it's for the families." Anyway, to cut a long story short, out of desperation, I found out how to contact Apple directly, sent an email to their front office, and a gentleman named Garth Tweedle responded to me. I'd never heard of him before, and he was interested. He said, "I can't promise you anything, but I'll look into it for you." And a week later, he sent me an email saying, "Well, I've looked at the sales, and you're right. It sold 1,270,000 odd copies. I think you must be entitled to something for this. Leave it with me. I promised nothing, but you never know your luck." A week or two later, he sends me an email back, and he said, "We've decided that we're going to do a gold award for you, for the four of you." And there you are. That's mine. Marianne has got hers, I believe. And
Yeah.
Ellie sent me an email earlier. That's Mike's widow. She's got hers. I haven't heard from Anne up in Scotland. That's Pete's partner. But the object was to make sure that everybody got a copy, and I'm pleased to say they have. As you might imagine, I'm thrilled to bits that I've actually got this
Sure.
recognition at last.
Well, belated congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So
the
how
best-
much time did you actually spend with the Beatles at all? Did you get to know any of them well?
The most contact I had with him was with Paul McCartney. Apart
Mhm.
from Ringo Starr at the Christmas party and having a good chinwag with him, the only one I really personally got chatty with was Paul McCartney himself. And that was at the recording sessions generally. It wasn't a case of, socializing. We did one session once, and Linda McCartney came down, and she was chatting to us, and she was quite interested in me because I just had, I was married. We just had the baby, and she was all interested in that.
Hmm.
But we didn't socialize such, as such. It was work related. It was recording studios, it was mixing and things like that.
Sure.
And you probably know about the fact that we got the advance of Hey Jude. Oh, don't you know about that? We were doing a mix.
Yeah.
You know about that?
I've heard something to that effect. Yeah.
Well, we were actually down there it was a night session. We were overdubbing some stuff, and Paul McCartney was up in the control box, chatting, listening to what Pete and Tom were doing. I was down on the studio floor with Mike, sitting down, having a coffee. And Paul McCartney came walking in and said, "Oh, I quite like that one that you're doing up there, lads." He said, "Listen to this. This is going to be our next single." So we stood up and stood in the crown of this grand. There's a Steinway piano in there. We're leaning on the inside curve, and he launched into "Hey Jude" like as if he was doing a concert. And Mike and I are looking at each other. And is this really happening to us? Because we didn't have cameras, we didn't have camera phones, nothing like that. It's all up here. You'll have to take my word for it. But what an experience that was.
Wow.
As you can well imagine.
Nice.
Nobody else in the world, as far as we know, had heard it up to that point.
Right.
Never forget that.
Did you have any dealings with Allan Klein?
Personally, no. That was all after I'd gone. Thank God.
Okay.
Darren?
Because from what I understand, I don't know if it was this early on, but Allan Klein was more concerned about the Beatles records and their solo records than the other artists on Apple. So I don't know if that, what's that?
That's probably true because it was after he became part and parcel of it. That's when the band got shunted onto Warner Brothers. Surely. I don't know.
I'm wondering if you ran into him at all, ever had any interaction?
No, never ever.
Okay. Darren?
Pass.
Could you shed a little light on what happened to the Maybe Tomorrow album? Because you had all the demos, and I would imagine the quality songs rose to the top, and they were the ones that you decided to record for your album, and the title track then comes out as the single.
Yeah.
But the album sits in limbo, comes out in just a few countries, not in the US, not in the United Kingdom. What can you tell us about the album Maybe Tomorrow, the band's thinking of when is this coming out, what's going on, and any frustration? Was that part of what you were referring to in that interview about feeling frustrated about the way things were going at Apple? Was part of that the way they were treating your album?
That would have been part of it, yes. There's no doubt of that. Thinking about the album itself, there was no true direction with the band at that time. Hence the start. There's the songs on there. There's no focus. There's so many different styles on there. We didn't really have a direction at that time. Excuse me. I mean, we were pleased that it was put out, and of course, it went out in conjunction with us being on that Gene Pitney tour. And we were disappointed that it didn't do as well as we'd have expected, but there you are.
Do you own a copy of the album?
I did. I had an original copy, but I lent it out and never ever saw it again until recently.
That is one of the more expensive collectible albums out there.
I couldn't believe what I was reading when I've seen the prices on eBay and places like that. But recently, when I got my copies of Head First and How Much Is the Sky, etc., etc., Mark Strothman sent me this package over, and as I was looking through them, what should I find but an original copy of Maybe Tomorrow, which I was not expecting. They've all chipped in and bought it for me as a present. So I've got a copy of it again.
No, you got it again. Because then it did come out on CD in the 90s.
Yeah, I've got a CD copy, but it's, to have the original vinyl copy is great. I'm thrilled to bits.
It's like as a record collector myself, it's one of the things that someday I'd love to, but I have to win a lottery first. It is
I'm lucky that I got it as a gift. I'd love to know who's got the copy. I lent it out. I forget. I tried all the people I could think of. I'd lent it to. No, we haven't got it. I haven't got it.
Well, you were able to get yourself a gold record. Maybe we could get a private investigator involved and track down Ron Griffiths' copy of Maybe Tomorrow.
Maybe I ought to auction that.
I want to go back a little and then come back to where we have left off in '69, but go back. This new album of demos actually does catch the Iveys at a period of transition, because some of the material was done with Dave Jenkins in the band before Tom Evans joined.
Yeah.
And there was a comment in the liner notes that when you started writing songs, songwriting was not something that Dave, who was also known as Di Jenkins, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken,
yeah. David.
uh, he did not take to songwriting all that much. Can you talk about the transition from Dave Jenkins and then Tom Evans coming into the band?
Yeah, of course. It was quite obvious at the time that Dave wasn't particularly interested in songwriting. He was heavily involved with a girl named Sue. Think of a surname in a minute. I can't remember the surname. And he spent more time out with her and wasn't interested in, generally speaking, it was Mike, Pete, and myself in the studio putting demos together. Di was in there at the very start, but he soon got cheesed off with it and never bothered. So it was quite clear he wasn't as keen as the rest of us. And we had a bit of a meeting with Bill, and we decided that perhaps we ought to get a replacement. So we actually told Di that we're gonna replace him, and he came up to we were playing in and around the Liverpool area gig wise, and we were all there. Dave was with us, and he came to. We went to 3 or 4 venues that where there were gigs on that night. The third one we went to, the first 2 we'd been, we weren't very impressed with what we'd seen. The third one, we went to a place called Litherland Town Hall, which is a suburb of Liverpool. And there was a band on there called Them Calderstones. And we walked in as they were doing I forget, it was a Tamla Motown song. Might have been Needle in a Haystack, I think. And we were quite impressed with what we saw. But the band were good. We thought, hey, Tom's the fella in the middle, quite a personality. We chatted to him when they were having their break and asked him if he had any leanings towards playing for a living, turning professional. And he seemed quite interested, and we invited him down to Golders Green. He came down with us and spent the weekend with us. Came to a gig we were doing. Wasn't too impressed with the first set that we did, but he thought the second one was brilliant, and he said, yes, I'm going to join. That's how he came to join the band, by virtue of a weekend with us, seeing 2 gigs, and then he quit his job and down he came.
And it was
I hope that answered the question.
It was a good fit from the start with Tom?
Oh, yeah. If anything, Tom was a little bit depressive at times. For all his personality, he was easily depressed, got down quite easily. But when he was up, he was fine. Mm-hmm. But he played it in treat. We did get on well as a band. It worked.
When you were working on the demos that we hear on this new album, did the band always tend to work together, or was anything done solo?
Well, very often they were done solo-wise, and now and again Pete would say, what do you think of this? And have you got anything you can throw in as a suggestion? The only time that we were all together was when we actually wanted to take the song to the next level, if you like, put drums on it, put bass on it. Generally speaking, it was a solo thing or a duet thing, mm-hmm. a duo thing,
Right.
There's quite a few songs that Pete's credited with. I threw my sixpenny thing. I never got any credit, but that didn't matter at the time. I was just happy to be helping Pete out with whatever he was doing. It was generally Pete that I cooperated with, if you like.
Mm-hmm. And then to jump back to the Apple period, the very beginnings of the Apple period, the album, I know by this time that this came out, you were no longer in the band, Magic Christian Music, the album. But some of the stuff on Magic Christian Music were tracks from Maybe Tomorrow.
Yeah.
But there were some other things on Magic Christian Music that were quote unquote new. And I'm curious of your involvement in those songs. And I wish I'm asking the question, and I should have written down the titles, but there are a few things that were newly released that weren't necessarily as new as Come and Get It and Carry On Till Tomorrow and Rock of All Ages. Were those songs that I'm referring to, were you part of that? A part of the band at that time?
I'd have to have the album in front of me right now. And
yeah, I should have.
You have a quick think while we.
I know one of them. One of them
Well,
here was Midnight Sun. Midnight
Well,
Sun was
I should have sung lead on that, but there again, that was one of these other sessions where I was in bed with chicken pox and couldn't get there.
Mm.
and they couldn't wait for you to get.
Oh, that was so annoying because when they'd finished doing that, Pete desperately wanted me to sing it because we'd rehearsed it with me singing it. And he came back from the session that they did that night and burst into I was still in bed ill. He came into the bedroom and he said, Ron, well, I'll say it exactly as he said it. Ron, I fucking murdered it, mush. That's how he put it, which I didn't think he did. But I wish to God I could have been there to do it. But there you are. That's another story. I wasn't well.
I thought his vocals were fine on that song.
Yeah, he did gun job. No problem. But that's what he was. He wanted me to do it. And there you are.
Dear Angie, but that might have been on the Maybe Tomorrow album. That's another
It was.
one of your songs.
Yeah.
Was that was a Maybe Tomorrow tune?
Mhm.
That made it onto Magic Christian Music?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
was.
Yeah, all right.
I
So
was surprised to hear the other day that that's had 32 million streams on Spotify.
wow.
It's had more streams on Spotify than Come and Get It.
Really?
Honestly, I was told by one of my grandsons initially, and I've since researched it, and yes, it's had 32 million streams. Come and Get It was something like 11 million streams. I couldn't believe that.
Mm.
Wow. Now, does your grandson is he impressed with what Granddad accomplished in a
Well,
past lifetime?
I'm talking about Ryan. Yes, he's yeah. Simple answer. Yes. He's very much involved in the music. He's into production. He's been in a couple of bands, and he was doing quite well up until COVID. He was he was in a recording studio down in London. I forget the name of it, but once COVID struck, it just finished it for him.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just got a regular day job, and he does production at home. He's got a home studio, and he does all his own stuff at home.
Nice, nice. The stuff that you did record that did come out on Apple and wherever, whatever album and whatnot, you worked with a couple of different producers. You mentioned Tony Visconti, who at the time wasn't Tony Visconti yet.
No. He was learning his craft.
Exactly. And also Mal Evans, his earliest, I guess, attempts at record production were some of the things with the Iveys. Talk about what it was like working with Mal. What was Mal like? Mal is, of course, now a lot of people are rediscovering him as an individual from all the appearances that were in the Beatles Get Back documentary that Peter Jackson did. Now there's Ken Womack's biography, and there's going to be a second volume to that coming. Talk about Mal a little, working with Mal, what he brought to the table with the band.
Mal was a lovely man, really, really. And he bent over backwards to help us. He really was a lovely man to work with. He was so down to earth and very friendly. He no airs and graces. Whatever knowledge he had, he'd picked up from being in the studio, watching what went on when the Beatles were recording. If you like, we were his plaything at the time. He couldn't do enough for us, but he was trying to advance his own capabilities by becoming a record producer, I guess. Mm-hmm. But, we just liked him. He was just so wonderful to be with. He was just a very, very open, kind-hearted soul.
Mm-hmm. And flipping to Tony Visconti, who would, of course, go on to become one of music's top producers. Did he display any skills at the time that you knew that this guy knew what he was doing and
yes,
had
definitely.
the ability to go on and further himself as a producer?
He was the complete package back then, to my mind. I mean, he's the one that scored the strings on Dear Angie for a start off. Mm-hmm. As it was, we wouldn't have dreamt of doing that, but he's the one that got that one done. We hired in 8 string, I forget how it was, There were 2 or 3 violins, a couple of cellos, and a couple of violas. And he recorded it once, kidded them that it didn't record very well, and did it again. So we ended up with a 16-piece string section in the background. Otherwise, we'd have had to pay them overtime rates. That's the sort of thing he was. He was a really, very down to earth. He was particularly friendly with me. I think it was because he was a bass player as well,
Right.
and I was a kindred spirit with him, if you like.
Mhm.
I don't know if you know this. He's put out an album. There's an album of his out currently with all the stuff that he was involved with T-Rex and Phil Collins and people like that.
I'm looking it up right now as we speak, trying to get the name of it, because he did include some Iveys, or not at least one song.
He's included Dear Angie on it.
Right, that's right.
Knocked me out for 6. I actually sent him a message on Messenger, and I've exchanged a couple of messages with him over the years. He remembers me, and I said, "Well, I just said thanks very much for including it on your album," and his reply was, "Well, why the hell wouldn't I?" So yeah, that was a real surprise. I was pleased as punch about that.
Yeah, it was a collection of yeah, I think it's titled something to the effect of produced by Tony Visconti, I think. Something like that, where it's a sampling of all the things.
I haven't seen it, but I heard about it,
Yeah. Of course, Ron, you weren't with the band beyond the end of 1969. What went wrong there in the relationship, and what caused it to end for you?
Well, I don't want to sound vindictive about it because, it's so long ago now, but at the time I was the only one who was married, and that went against the grain with Bill Collins, because even before I ever got involved with Maureen, if any of the boys, Pete was involved with Beverly, and he didn't like that, and he didn't like the fact that Di was involved with Sue Wing, her name was. I finally remembered it. He just didn't like ladies involved. He saw them as a distraction. And back then, the image problem, if you had to be single and attracted to the girls if you're in a band. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because I was the only one married and had a young baby son at the time, we'd go out on gigs and come back. And Tommy used to we'd get in at 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And I would go and settle down with Maureen and the baby. He'd have his stereo on in the room next door at God knows what time in the morning, waking the baby up. And it created friction. And we had a job living with it, and we couldn't afford to move out the house and go and live somewhere else because the money was pretty sparse for us back then. And it just got worse and worse. And Bill and Tom managed to had a little tete-a-tete and said, well, they sensed that the atmosphere wasn't as it should be. And between the two of them, excuse me, they came up with this idea that Ron's not one of the boys anymore, which was absolute rubbish. I mean, I was rehearsing, I was doing the gigs, doing my bit. They had a meeting between the four, I think Bill, Tommy, Pete, and Mike. We think perhaps we ought to ask Ron if he'd like to leave, or we think he ought to leave. And Pete and Mike weren't particularly wanting. They wanted me to stay. Mike told me this when I socialized with him years after. He said it wasn't Pete and me, Ron. He said when we went down to Apple, we put it in front of Derek Taylor, the Apple press officer, and he was the casting vote. He said, "Well, I'll go in favour with you and with Bill and Tom." So it was a 3-2 vote against Pete and Mike, and that's what actually got me out. Mike told me all this. So it was at the time it was a reluctant departure. I mean, there was such an awful atmosphere at times. I was, on the one hand, I was glad to get out of the stress part of it, but having done all the blooming spade work and being there from the start, you can imagine what I felt like, especially when I was going to work on a push bike and listening to people in the factory I was working in at the time singing "Come and Get It."
Yeah.
Took a lot. It was hard to live with, but there we are.
Yeah. Did you continue in music? Did you do anything else professionally?
Oh, not professionally. I played in loads of different local bands. um, Irish country and western, jazz, you name it, pretty much big spectrum. The
Mhm.
best local band I actually gigged with was called the Wright Brothers Band, and we had a bit part in Four Weddings and a Funeral. Did you know that?
Yes,
No. Oh, okay.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
that's
I was
another
going to
story.
ask
But
about that.
the, the first band seen in the film in the marquee, you'll catch a glimpse of me. It's a long story. I won't bore you with that one.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, well, if you want to hear it, the drummer
Yeah.
of the band, Dave Wright, was the drummer, and the band was called the Wright Brothers Band. His brother was having a drink in a local bar one night, and one of his friends was assistant to the director of the film company, and they were chatting about what they're doing. He said, "Oh, we're just about to do this budget movie called Four Weddings and a Funeral. We're looking for a band actually to do one of the scenes." So Dave's brother said, "Oh, my brother Dave's in a good little band. Perhaps you'd like to give them a shot." So they came along, and I listened to one of the gigs we were at, and thought, "Hey, they just it was a function too we were playing. We had Dickie bows on and everything, which is what they wanted for this film apparently." And we got given 4 songs. You have to play them exactly as you hear them, as the covers. One of them was, of course, was um, the obvious one, "Love Is All Around." But he said you must do it like the Trogs. And the other 3 numbers were "Walking Back to Happiness," which you probably never heard before, by Helen Shapiro,
Right.
Oh,
Crocodile Rock, and that's how we got the bit part in the film.
That's cool.
If you blink, you'll miss us, but it's in there.
the sales of the DVD will be shooting up right after the show goes out.
Okay.
Did you try and stay in touch with the other members after
Early on,
this?
I did early on. I actually went to 2 or 3 sessions. I went to one at Air Studios and met Todd Rundgren.
Uh-huh.
I went to 2 or 3, but then it fizzled out after that when the band was, if you like, on the verge of breaking up. Nothing at all. The only person I socialized with after that was going over to see Mike a couple of times.
Did you before? I'm sorry, Ken. I throw it to you, but um, did you know Joey Molland at all? Did you get to know him at all?
I met him a couple of times at these sessions that they were doing, mixed downs they were generally, and the next time I met him was at Pete's funeral. He came down for that.
Yeah, tell that must have been horrible. When you learned about Pete's death in
Oh,
1975,
that was just awful. Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
and
It just I don't really want to talk about it. He had a macabre sense of humor, Pete. I just couldn't believe it. His ex-girlfriend rang me up out of the blue one day. I was up in the garden doing some gardening, I think, and Maureen, my wife, shouted up, "Ron, Bev's on the phone." So I went down and picked the phone, and she sounded quite distraught. She said, "Ron, sit down." I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "It's Pete." I said, "What's he been in an accident?" And then she burst out crying, and she told me what had happened. So I couldn't believe it.
were you aware of this financial state and what the band was going through at that time with Warner Brothers, with Stan Polly, etc.?
I had no idea, honestly.
Really? Oh, wow.
I know it. I had to nag Bill to get my royalty share of Come and Get It. That's another sad story. Joey was convinced I'd signed my rights away. All I ever remember signing for was to be paid a check for my royalty share of Come and Get It once the sales graph had dropped off the edge. The check was for 7,000 UK pounds, which half went to the tax. Now I got a check for £3,500, and that's what I signed for. I didn't sign away any of my so-called rights, but they're convinced I did. The next time I met Joey was there was a court case back in the 80s, I think it was. He put something out behind Mike and Bill's back. It was a live gig somewhere, I think he'd put out,
Yeah.
and there was a court case down in the High Court in London. I went down, I met him there as well. That's the only times I've ever met him. And although I've got my grievances against what's happened with the royalties and all, I'm very, very sad to hear of his recent illness.
Yeah.
I sent a message to his lady friend saying, in spite of my grievances, I'm sorry to hear this. I hope he gets better soon. So,
Yeah.
And very nice, Ron.
well,
Were
for
you
all the
aware?
grievance, well, carry on. Sorry,
Yeah. Were you aware of the financial difficulties later on after Pete died? Did you keep in touch with Tom about it?
never Tom. No, I mean I was blown away when I found out that he hanged
Yeah.
himself as well. Mike told me that things were bad. That's where I heard about financial difficulties from Mike.
Yeah. All right. Hmm. You were saying before with the demos that you didn't feel like they were all that focused, okay, on
Yeah.
how much is the sky. And then at the same time, you kind of felt like maybe tomorrow the album wasn't strong enough in a way, right?
Well, that's what I meant because it was only after I'd gone and Joey joined that there seemed to be a general direction of the style of music. That's when Pete's songwriting really came into its own, as after I'd gone, ironically.
Okay. Because when I listen to these demos, I see so much potential in this band.
Mhm.
There are songs in here that commercially are just so appealing, where if the group picked up and recorded them for maybe tomorrow or Magic Christian Music, they could have worked really well.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
thinking about the title track, which you have to talk about because you wrote it with Pete, but the song Today is extremely commercial. You
yeah.
saw all these signs within the band of songs that could go somewhere. They'll be around. What a terrific song that is. I mean, the hooks that are in there and in the chorus, you could hear that this band, all the different songwriters, had all this potential. So that's the fascinating thing about listening to these demos. You can see where the band would go. And I didn't necessarily think that they were not focused. I just thought that musically you were very spread out, which the Beatles always were, you know. But I really have enjoyed listening to this. And I could see so many of these songs later on being re-recorded and maybe produced a little bit better, and working.
You're probably right there. I'm although I'm critical, I'm very proud of the fact it's out there. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's number 4 of 7 apparently. I don't know what's going to follow it up. I know we did quite a lot of stuff that mainly covers at the BBC at the Maida studio.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they're still available, but I'm proud of the fact it's out there.
I have to ask you a very silly question. But I'm going to do it anyway.
You probably get a silly answer.
Okay. Because I asked Joey this question, but when I look at the song titles here, you've got Take Good Care of My Baby, which I immediately think of Bobby V,
Bobby
Carole
V.
King song. You've got Ain't That Peculiar, which I immediately think is Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye, yeah.
No Dice album. You got a song there, Love Me Do. I mean,
Mhm.
Yeah.
naturally, my mind would think, or if I didn't know the songs, if I was looking at the song titles here, I would think, oh, these are covers.
Yeah.
Oh, they're doing the Beatles song. Was any of that intentional?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look at Maybe Tomorrow. That was an Everly Brothers song, wasn't it? The actual title.
The Jackson 5 song.
Okay.
That was actually after. Um, was it Everly Brothers too? Well,
I know that title comes up somewhere else on a well-known record.
The band Stereophonics
Oh
has a
yeah.
song called Maybe Tomorrow that came out like in the 90s, I think. And I always, because I work at a WFUV, a radio station in New York City, we play some stereophonic stuff. And whenever Maybe Tomorrow, I think I've actually done this years ago.
Well,
When Maybe Tomorrow has come up on the playlist, I've gone and grabbed the Iveys tune and played it, and went on the air and go, how brilliant am I that I played two songs in a row with the same title, the Iveys and Stereophonics.
uh,
two
yeah.
Welsh bands.
Um, Yeah, but that's what I think about when I listen to these demos here to see that this band was really going somewhere, and there's a natural growth between that, maybe Tomorrow, Magic Christian. By the way, I really wanted to talk about Dear Angie because it's one of my favorite Badfinger songs. Well, was that about a particular girl at the time in your life, or who
Oh
was
yeah.
it?
At the
Yeah.
time, I was it's an old-fashioned word. I was courting Maureen.
Hmm.
She lived 30 miles up the road. We used to see each other fairly regularly, and that was the inspiration for the song. Her name was Maureen Angela Atkinson at the time, and I couldn't say Dear Maureen or Dear Angela, so it came Dear Angie. Angie was a popular name anyway at the time, so that's how the song came about. It was because of my relationship with Maureen.
Okay. Well, she should be proud of that song.
Well, she doesn't know that it's got 32.5 million streams on, on Spotify. You
That's
hear those figures and you think, hey, he must be rolling in money, but you don't get any money for those streams. No,
yeah.
even if you got a penny a shot, that would be quite a few quid in your bank, but they don't pay out. Excuse
You
me.
I
get a
know
gold record for that one.
on my radio show, on my live radio shows, I've played Dear Angie quite a bit because, it's one of my favorite songs and I do love the whole strings and everything about it. Very unique melody to it and, I think it's, brilliant recording.
Well, that's my pride and joy as it's the only thing I've ever done that I can truly say that's a good song.
Hmm.
I always
Okay.
hope that somebody like one of these crooners would take it up and make a hit of it, and it never
I
happened.
I know Darren was talking about this before, but when you see the song selection on Maybe Tomorrow and then Magic Christian Music, are you pleased with the way that the direction that the band was going then? Or did you wish that more of the songs from Maybe Tomorrow were on there? You also had Sally Blue on
No,
Magic Christian
on the
Music.
Maybe Tomorrow album, yeah.
Yeah, I'm married Maybe Tomorrow. So it's just nice to see some of the songs from the past being recognized in some way, bringing them back. So, but how did you feel about the choices that were made for Magic Christian Music?
Well, I couldn't really argue about it. I just thought, what they put on there was what was necessary. To take stuff off the Maybe Tomorrow, uh, other, for example, Sally Blue, that's not on Magic Christian, is it?
No,
Do you know? I can't remember.
I thought it
no,
was.
no,
In a
it's
nutshell, what they did was what they did, and that's it. I don't think there's no point in splitting hairs over it. What was on there was suitable, and that's the end of it.
Hmm. Okay. Well, are there any particular songs on the demos that are like standouts or favorites for you?
Well, the title track's the standout one for me, really.
Yeah.
That sounds a bit smug, but it is.
How did
There's,
you and Pete write it? What was the inspiration behind that one?
you don't half asked some tricky questions. I'm sorry, I thought I got rid of this cough. Um, hmm, I said, there again, it's girl related. It's about love. It's about a feeling for somebody. That's where it came from. It doesn't just click out. I just maybe a frame of mind about thinking about Maureen again, probably because it was at that time. There wouldn't have been any other inspiration for it.
Hmm. Did you and Pete share in the lyrics, or did one write the lyrics and one write the melody? How did that work when you wrote with Pete?
Um, it was half and half. I mean, lyrics wise, it was probably me that for that. But the actual tune was a collaboration as well. We just hashed it up, bounced it back and forth off each other. It's a
Hmm.
50-50 thing. I wouldn't say it was, one more than the other. Not answering your questions very well, am I?
That's fine. Yeah, this is the first time I'm hearing anything about these songs, so it's great to get any knowledge about them.
Oh, okay.
Um, Can you tell me Sausage and Egg? Um, Kind of an odd song, but what is that high-pitched keyboard sound that you hear in it?
That was Pete's
Remember?
guitar. Double try, speed it up, double speed on the tape. You mean that? I can't even whistle it.
Yeah, but
That bit. That's
okay.
Pete's guitar.
It's
It was
very kind of
recorded at once at 7.5 and speed it up to 15, something like that.
okay. It's really high up there. It's a little,
That's what
piercing.
that noise is.
Okay. Um, Really impressed with kind of everything here. And I just love the fact that because you don't normally think outside of, a few people like Ringo or Phil Collins or Don Henley, drummers that write songs. So just to hear Mike Gibbons' early tunes here is like I mentioned, Tomorrow Never Comes. I
Yeah.
really like that one. Can you just tell me about Get High? Because that one sounds like it wasn't even in the same room. It almost sounds like a live track, if you remember that particular recording and maybe
I
where it was
can't.
done.
I'll have to listen to it properly. I haven't had much of a chance.
Okay.
Well, I won't bore you with this, but I've got my brother's in hospital. I've got a lot going on up here at the minute.
Oh, okay. All right.
I
Well,
have one very, very quick question. It just has to do with, and I don't know if you're familiar with these albums, Ron. The first, if I remember correctly, the first demo collections that came out, Badfinger related, were Pete Ham albums, and one was called Seven Park Avenue, the other was Golders Green. Were those demos that were on those albums pretty much done in the same setting as you were talking about, obviously, with the titles of the albums, being the house that you were all living in? But were some of those demos that the whole band worked on that were on those albums?
I think it was all done in the same studio down in Seven Park Avenue.
Hmm.
That's
How
all
much
I can think of now.
material is there?
They were all done. They were all done in exactly the same way that in on the Revox.
Is there a lot more material? I see this one also says Anthology Volume 4. Is there going to be a 5, 6, and further? Is there much more material?
The plan is to go to Volume 7,
Wow.
oh,
and there's probably stuff in the can that I've either forgotten about or I'm not aware of.
The band, the Iveys,
That's the plan. Volume 7.
wow. They
Okay.
actually may end up coming away with most demos left behind, unreleased material of any band in history at this rate. I
I
mean,
don't
what?
know. They've obviously Dan, bless his soul, got managed to get a lot of stuff from Bill. He's probably got stuff that I'd forgotten about. That Mark and the other, the other lads have got hold of. So watch this space, I suppose, is the best way of looking at that one. But yes, Volume 7 is what they're aiming to get out as far as.
Wow. Good. Good. Got that to look forward to.
all
Yeah,
right.
hopefully so.
Ron, this has been absolutely wonderful chatting with you here. And want to remind everybody the name of the CD here of the Ivy's demos is How Much Is the Sky? Go out and get it. Like I
And
said,
I got my vinyl copies today,
Oh, you did?
coincidentally enough, and I have not had a chance to open them. But it is my understanding that if you get the LP and there's going to be limited pressing, inside is an art print, I believe, or a poster that you signed.
Yeah, there were 300 plus of them. I signed 310 of them, I think. And the annoying thing was I got a problem with my left thumb. It's arthritic, and I had to give up writing some of the. I did about 10 at a go, and then my thumb would start to ache. It took me ages to sign them, but yeah, you'll find my moniker on your copy.
Well, I look forward to open them up later on tonight. And for me, if you just give me five seconds, guys, as a fan of Badfinger from when I was still 4 years old, I think Come and Get It was released before I turned 5. Getting to meet you here is an honor, a privilege, and hopefully our paths cross again, maybe when Anthology 5 comes out. Uh, and
More
I
than
want to personally thank you for the music and for taking time to talk with us.
well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, you three lads.
Yeah, and on my behalf, I've enjoyed listening to Badfinger's music and learning more and more about them. And the more you study all their albums, the more you appreciate, you know, how unique a band they were and truly talented. And like I said, great songwriters, great vocalists,
Mm.
so much even going back that you see the seeds of it on these demos
Yeah.
from the 60s. And it's great that Bill Collins saved these tapes and that they sound as good as they do.
Yeah.
And you're always welcome to come back anytime you want, Ron.
Okay, Ken.
Yeah, it can even be 3 in the morning your time, and it wouldn't bother me. So
I'll see if I can
whenever.
log in. Good night, Ken. Good night, Alan. And good night, Darren.
Thank you,
Thank
Ron.
you, Ron.
Good night and best.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was really incredible. Our conversation there with Ron Griffiths. Again, thank you, Ron, for spending time with us. Really is fascinating to hear the whole history of Badfinger there, and for a band that I admired so much for their songwriting skills, and even with the earlier members like Ron, if you just think of the classic four, Ron did some songwriting too, and to know that Bill Collins, their manager, encouraged them to pick up on the songwriting, which they really didn't get going there until the mid 60s or so. But great proof of that right here of how they were developing again in this CD. Okay. How Much is the Sky on Y&T Records, also available on vinyl too, limited edition vinyl. All right. So why don't we tell the folks what we've been up to lately, starting with Darren.
All right. You can listen to me at WFUV Monday through Thursday nights from 10 p.m. till 2 in the morning. Of course, that's Monday through Thursday nights into Tuesday through Friday mornings. Okay. And Saturday afternoons from 1 until 4 on WFUV in New York City at 90.7 FM. You can listen, if you're in the tri-state area, you can listen to on, well, at 90.7 FM or stream anywhere you are. We even have an app you can download. Sorry. You want me to start from the top? What?
Said pays to buy the best.
Yeah, as I'm going, I feel a tickle coming. Where should I start?
Alan, any suggestion?
Just, you were so close to the beginning. Just start from the beginning. And
From the beginning?
oh, actually, I mean, you got as far as saying there's an app you can download.
Okay. And there's an app you can download, and you can listen to us on that at WFUV, and that's in New York City. And look for me on Facebook. I have two Facebook pages, Darren DeVivo, and the other one is Darren DeVivo at Darren DeVivo, Beatle, WFUV DJ and Beatle podcaster. Either way, as I always say, hook up on one and I'll get you on the other, even though for the most part, they're kind of redundant, two pages. And that's the best way to keep in touch with me personally.
All right, Alan, how about you?
Okay. I've been, we're talking about what we've been doing. I mean, Adrian and I are both sort of getting our ducks in a row, as they say, and for volume 3 and collecting information and starting to sort of put some things together. And haven't got too far yet, but it looks like it's going to be an exciting addition, let's say, because, well, what he got up to in the 1980s. Anyway, you can reach me on Facebook. I also have two pages. One is just Allan Kozinn. The other is Allan Kozinn Remixed. You can find me on Blue Sky. You can find all of us. We still have a Twitter page. We don't have a Blue Sky page yet. The Twitter page is @ThingsWeSaidFab. You can contact all of us by email at thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com. Do check out our YouTube page. That's basically, I guess, the primary source of the podcast now, although there's the audio podcast, which is really just the soundtrack of the video podcast. There's no difference. And you can find that on Podbean or Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio. And, we're all over the place. So, yeah, our Facebook page too, Things We Said Today video podcast. We post when the new shows are posted onto YouTube. We immediately post it on Facebook as well, so you won't miss a second. Anyway, that's that. Ken?
All right. Again, I just want to say thanks to everybody who sends me information that I could use in my newscast. If you feel there's something I left out, maybe I didn't get around to, always feel free to write to us here or write to me directly. My email address is everylittlething@att.net. And our email address for the show is thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com. Okay, you can also friend me on Facebook at Ken Michaels. And as far as my other activities, there's this other talk show podcast called Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast, which is going to have its first show of 2025. We're coming back. And a little birdie told me that we may have a new member in the show. I don't know. We'll have to find out. You'll have to catch the first show of the new year, and that should be coming by the end of this week. All right. And on my own YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio, I did a show with Beatly Tone and Dino Visera. They both have very popular YouTube channels. Beatly Tone, it's all about Beatles on his channel. And for
No,
Dino,
it's about tones.
sometimes, if he goes off topic, he tends to just automatically go to tones. But Beatly Tone is extremely popular. Dino has his own Facebook page called Coming Up the World of Paul McCartney. Plus, he has his YouTube channel, which is called Dino V. That's VEE. And that's all about Beatles and Paul. And so I had the two of them list their top 5 Paul McCartney songs that he's never done live before, even in the Beatle years, that you would like to see him do live. And you'll notice that once you watch that show and you hear our suggestions, that Paul's just not going to do those songs, especially after the shows that he's doing this week. Actually, and I asked them if they would add 2 songs that Paul hasn't done for a while that you'd like to see him bring back into the set list. So you can find out what their choices were. Okay, that was really cool. And I also did a show with Tom Frangione from the SiriusXM Beatles channel, and also Jeremy Potorala, who's one of our regular viewers and listeners. He also watches Talk More Talk, and is a big fan and Tom shows on SiriusXM. And we also had Scott O'Rourke, who does a Beatles show. You hear me mention his name in the news in almost every show. He does a Beatles show called With the Beatles on WUSB. That's Stony Brook University's station, every Thursday night from midnight to 3. And all 3 of us, well, all 4 of us actually, went to see Ringo's shows at the Ryman. So I thought, what a cool idea to get people who were actually there to witness it and share their own memories and experiences of a very special event there. Those 2 shows that Ringo just did in Nashville at the Ryman Theater. So we just did a show on that, and that's on my YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio. If you can, please subscribe to that channel, subscribe to ours here at Things We Said Today, and Talk More Talk if you haven't done so already. Also on my own website, kenmichaelsradio.com, you know that there's Beatles trivia there all the time. And in the latest contest, well, you can always win one of 10 great prizes, but I got a new one for you. This baby right here, Daytime Revolution. And that is the recent documentary on the week that John and Yoko spent co-hosting the Mike Douglas Show. And in fact, while you're watching this, if you haven't watched it already, go back to a show that we did a couple of months ago with Eric Nelson, who is the director of this documentary. Find out all the work that was put into all the shows that they did together. You learn a lot about how involved Yoko was, especially in picking the guests. Daytime Revolution. This is the Blu-ray that I have to give away now. It's also available on DVD. But that's one of the many prizes you can win on my website at kenmichaelsradio.com. Okay, and don't forget my radio show, Every Little Thing, which you can listen to on demand at WFDU.FM. That's Fairleigh Dickinson University Station. When you go to the list of shows they have there, type in Every Little Thing. They'll have the last 2 shows that they aired. Each show runs for 2 weeks on their website. Okay, check that out for sure. So this has been a tremendous show. Again, many thanks to Ron Griffiths for joining us. Thanks to all of you for watching. And for Allan, Darren, and myself, I'm Ken Michaels saying thanks so much for tuning in. And we'll see you next time. Take care.